Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Metro Inner Development Assessment panel meeting for this morning. I declare the meeting open at 9:36, and in doing so acknowledge that we're hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respect to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters and community. The meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders and DAP Regulations 2011. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website. By being present at this meeting, attendees consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings are also made available on the DAP website and YouTube page. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. My name is Clayton Hyam and I'm your presiding member for today's meeting. With me, I have Francesca Lafanta, the Deputy Presiding Member, and Peter Lee on my left, the Third Specialist Member. Online, we have Councillor Phil Marks and Mayor Robert Rossi. And later on, we'll have Councillor Sonia Heath and Councillor Jeffrey Irvin for Part C, the Town of Cottesloe item. I have apologies from Councillor Lorraine Young, Part C, the Town of Cottesloe, and Mayor Melissa Harkins for Part C of the Town of Cottesloe. Minutes of previous meetings are available on the DAP website. Moving to Part B of the meeting, which is the City of Belmont. Declarations of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered the documentation contained within Part B of the agenda and Part B related information. Could I please have confirmation by show of hands that members have duly considered all the information? Thank you very much. That's everyone. Disclosures of interest. Councillors, did this matter go to a council meeting or a briefing session?
No.
Okay, thank you. Are there any disclosures of interest?
No.
No. Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on to the item 3.1, which is lot 1017, number 3 Hawkesburn Road, Rivervale, a mixed-use development. I've got 3 presenters this morning. They're all in person, and presenters, you know the situation. You've got 3 minutes each, or the equivalent of 3 minutes each. So I'll give you a total of 9 minutes, and then we'll go to questions after that. So whoever wants to kick off, please do.
Please the first one. That's okay.
Thank you.
We send a presentation. My presentation is very brief. I think I want to allow enough time for the planner and our traffic consultant to discuss one of the conditions.
Okay.
See if it's changing. So our proposal before you today is one of the final pieces in a larger puzzle of development between the Swan River and the Great Eastern Highway. With the Birdswood Racecourse development now well underway, our scheme represents a step to develop this important gateway site, making the entry to the Springs Precinct and creating a connection between the existing green spine and the edges of the Swan River. Significant changes have been made to the way that the site is approached, with additional height at the corner addressing the public spaces across the site, while reducing bulk and scale towards the adjacent property to emphasize the site's role as an urban gateway to the whole Cottesloe area. Clearly, things have changed in the regional guidelines were put in place. The scale of development along Great Eastern Highway, as well as the increased bulk and scale, represents a significant shift from what was originally anticipated for the site. The shift should also include parking requirements, which is one of the items that we would like to discuss with you today. From an urban perspective, our proposal provides a clear entry to the precinct, presenting a 16-story building at the corner of the site and transitioning height towards adjacent properties. Public spaces will integrate with existing public spaces and the proposed building, creating a cohesive ground floor interface that celebrates the entry to the Springs Precinct. The residential entry on the park side creates an urban response that enhances pedestrian amenity while providing a street activation along both primary frontages. A well-connected site with easy access to public transport and proximity to major entertainment and business precincts within an area with a generous provision of on-street parking based on our traffic assessment, this should be support a reduction in the provision of commercial parking on site. Obviously, our traffic and planning consultants will just provide a further rationale to what we are discussing today as one of the conditions in the approval. Just to finalize, given the strength of our proposal, the support from the design review panel and the City of Belmont planning team recommendation for approval, I respectfully request that the panel support the office's recommendation while also reconsidering one of the conditions within the approval. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll try and keep everything within 3 minutes. For a development like this, it would be great to have more time, but I'll fire off. Thank you for, I guess I've got Angel Biondi here with me from Urbanista to assist with any questions after the meeting, but after the presentation. But I would like to start by thanking the city's officers for their support of the application and their comprehensive RAR. This is a great development for the Springs area. It is well designed, supported by the DRP, and it will provide a significant number of dwellings which are required in the current environment where we're experiencing a serious housing shortage. With respect to the conditions of approval, they're generally supported. As demonstrated in the additional information provided by the applicant, our primary point of contention lies with proposed condition number 3 and the distribution of car parking. We have submitted an alternative planning condition which is consistent with the practical operation and physical configuration of this development, which we hope that that will support. The city's proposed condition number 3 seeks to limit the number of parking bays which are allocated to residents, while increasing the number of bays which are distributed to the office, cafe, and to residential visitors. It seeks to allocate 145 parking bays to residents, 16 to the office, and 19 for reciprocal use by the cafe patrons and residential visitors. This does not work. It is not what was presented to the city. It is not what the plans show, and we've not had the opportunity to consider the parking reconfiguration during the assessment process. The allocation of bays as proposed by the city was not raised during the assessment process. The first time we were notified of this was when the RAR was released. Complying with the condition would result in a significant redesign of the development, and it would most importantly have a significant impact on the commercial ability to develop this site. If we have to comply with this condition, there's a serious question mark over whether this development can proceed. We need these residential we need the resident bays for these apartments. What we've requested is for the parking to be allocated to allow for 162 bays for residents and 18 bays that sit outside the secure gates on the ground floor to be distributed to commercial, office and cafe, and residential visitor parking. The 18 bays would be addressed in a parking management plan as proposed in condition number 19 of the RAR. The assessment provided in the addendum demonstrates that applying the scheme-based assessment is not appropriate for this development. The 18 bays we are proposing to allocate to commercial and residential visitor parking is acceptable, and it can be managed under the parking management plan. More importantly, it will not have a significant redesign of the parking levels, and it will ensure that this development will proceed. There is substantial on-street parking available outside the site, as well as a public car park located approximately 80 metres northeast of the subject site, all of which help to offset the need to provide the significant number of commercial and visitor parking bays that the city has asked that we provide. Scott will go into more detail about this in his presentation, so I'll conclude and hand over to Scott.
Good morning, JDAP Chair, panel members and councillors. To assist the DAP, PTG Consulting has provided a technical memo that details our view on the development parking assessment and why we consider that the proposed provision is suitable for the likely parking demand experienced by the proposal. As a summary of the assessment, I state the following. For the office parking requirement, the parking rate used by the city is significantly higher, in fact up to 6 times, than the parking rates suggested within the WA Planning Manual non-residential parking rates, and don't adequately consider the proximity of the development site to high-frequency public transport or quality shared path networks. Nor more recent changes to work balance practices that can reduce demand for office staff parking. There is also high volumes of public on-street and commercial parking stations available around the site. Given that it is typical human behaviour when visiting an unfamiliar location to park in locations that are immediately visibly recognisable, it is likely that the infrequent visitors to the office uses would choose to park on street or in the clearly marked public parking stations before choosing obscured basement parking. It is therefore considered that the on-site parking provision proposed is sufficient for the majority of the office-based business types. For residential and general visitor parking requirements, residential visitor parking demand and demand for food and beverage visitor parking typically peaks outside of normal business hours and as such would rarely clash with the office-based parking demand, allowing the parking provision to effectively service both office, residential and general visitor uses with the same parking bay provision. A proportion of visitors to residents may also visit the food and beverage uses within the site during the same trip, effectively further sharing the demand over the different uses. The city's parking assessment also doesn't seem to adequately consider the high residential density both within and around the site and would be expected to increase the proportion of walk-up customers to food and beverage offerings, further reducing the parking demand when compared to a similar type of establishment located away from residential developments, yet is being assessed under the same parking rate. It is therefore considered that the proposed parking provision for residential and general visitors is sufficient within the site. Now, parking availability within the surrounding area, a review of weekday aerial photos of the surrounding streets within the 400-metre walkable catchment between the 14th of July 2026 and 27th of May 2025, during times ranging between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. During weekdays, shows an average on-street parking bay availability of 17 vacant parking spaces. This is in addition to parking available within the Wilson's parking station, which is located directly next to the development site. It is therefore considered that the availability of public accessible parking in close proximity to the site provides a significant supplement to the parking proposed within the site. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have in this regard. Thank you.
Well done. Finally, my first. Panel members, questions of the presenters? I've got a question. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. My question relates to the parking availability in the area. Could you speak a little bit further about your assessment you undertook? The times that I was in the area in the context of this development, there were very few parking available on street bays, and I was there weekdays, not evening or weekend. Can you speak about your study, your information that you gathered in relation to your, I think you indicated on average there was 17 available bays. Could you speak about that in the context
Yeah, certainly.
of your outcomes?
Now, I admit it's not a detailed parking survey, just due to the timing of the information that we received in the RAR and the DAP, etc. The survey was done using aerial photography. So I've looked at basically just over a 12-month period. I could potentially have gone back, but then the further you go back in the aerial photography, other factors can influence it, such as developments that perhaps weren't completed or under construction at the time. Using the angle of shade from trees and the date, and then corresponding it in terms of, there's like these fancy websites that'll tell you what time of the day it was. I was able to determine that all of the photos that we looked at, which I think there was about 7 photos in total between that period, occurred between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and they were all weekdays. I've got, I think most of them were Tuesdays. There was a Monday, and the rest were all Tuesdays for whatever reason. And based on the aerial photography and the catchment area was a 400-metre radius, so it did extend out beyond the immediately adjacent streets. But based on those snapshots, and obviously it's only a one snapshot in a moment, the average was 17 bays available. Now, it ranged from 26 bays being available, which was on the Monday, 27th of October 2025, and the lowest was 8 bays being available, which was the 27th of May 2025, and that was a Tuesday. So there was a fairly large range based on the photos, but over that period, the average was 17, and that didn't include the Wilson's car park, because obviously the aerial photos can't show me what's available in that. So it wasn't just due to timing, it wasn't a detailed parking survey. So we didn't get the opportunity to look at, you know, the frequency of turnover, etc. But just from those aerial photo snapshots, that's the information that we were able to derive. So yeah, on one particular day, there may be significantly less parking, and on another particular day there may be significantly more. And I guess it depends on what time a visitor may turn up. But just based on that information, that's what we were able to ascertain.
Thank you. I have a second question. If I may, my second question, and anyone on the team can answer this, it's again a parking issue, possibly more from myself, Peter, it's from a planning perspective. One of the comments that provided in the planning submission was about the concern regarding the security gate, and the submission spoke to two aspects. One was tandem parking, and I'm parking, excuse the pun, the tandem parking. There was some clarity and clear information regarding the ability to reuse tandem parking, to separate the tandem parking. My question specifically relates to the individual bays, and it relates to the concerns that were raised about the inability for those bays to be used for anything other than residential parking. And I'm interested in your comments about commercial parking behind the security gates and what the concerns were that you raised about them essentially creating some sort of security issues. And I'm not talking about visitor parking, I'm specifically talking about commercial parking, so dedicated to a commercial activity in the same way that residential might be dedicated to a residential. What were the concerns, or could you explain further about the concerns regarding the safety behind that gate that you raised in your submission?
So in that's sorry, remember that's on the ground floor?
Yes.
Yeah, those spaces on the ground floor. So we I guess there's probably a couple of points here. The first one being that we haven't been able to consider the city's redistribution of parking. This was the first time that the plans that were presented. We assumed that we understood the application was going to be supported. We understood during the assessment process the further information that was provided, the stuff that we were asked for, that parking wasn't in contention. And so the condition that came out, which is proposed condition number 3, I guess resulted in the need to then provide further information, having Scott do further analysis, and I guess. So that's probably one point to just to point out, that we haven't had an opportunity to I guess to deal with this other than after the RAR was released. Ideally, we would prefer that all parking sits on one side of the security gate, especially if they're being used in a reciprocal manner. So where we have a residential visitor and some commercial, and the cafe being the city's proposing that the cafe and the residential visitor be used in a reciprocal manner, that sits outside the security gates. They're able to be accessed. You're able to enter into this development, you're able to access those bays, and you don't have to. There's a security, I guess, purpose there in terms of what goes on behind the security gate. So if you're an owner here and you have a bay that you've got secure access, there's no one coming in from a commercial perspective or residential visitor if there's reciprocal use there. So that's I mean that's the intent of I guess the layout on the ground floor, the gates. They would act in the same way as they do in any other development, where we try and keep all the residential visitor on the outside of the gates, so they're accessible to people entering the site. But also there's an aspect there as well, is how these are used from an office component or from a commercial component. If there are visitors, if the base is designated, if there are workers in the office that the base is designated to, that is fine. But if there are visitors to the commercial premises as well, to these offices, then we've got another security issue there as well that occurs if we allow them access behind the gate. So we've designed this in a way which is simple, which works well. We have 18 bays sitting outside the development. How you want to distribute those bays, we believe it's the best way to deal with that is through the parking management plan, which then allows the city some flexibility and us to be able to deal with that. We have a cafe use which will probably run till about 2 p.m. and close. So there's an ability there to share those bays even in a more flexible manner. So I mean I guess to answer your question, there is an opportunity to have people going behind these gates if they're operating from the office. But from a security perspective, from a design perspective, and from what we've proposed, we believe that the security gates provide that cut-off, and 18 bays that we've allocated to the commercial and to the residential visitor works, and it can be dealt with under the parking management plan. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, if I may, presiding member, just to build or explain a little bit more of the thinking behind the design as well. I think that's really important to being able to answer the security question. So those bays line up obviously with those tandem bays on the ground floor. And so there are 40 tandem bays, but they operate as 20 bays, right? You've got, a 1-2 configuration. So what I think is important to point out is you can't treat the residential bays as a pool that you can extract from because of the fact that we've got so many tandem bays as part of this. So if you were to start extracting some of those bays for residential purposes and rolling them over to a commercial purpose, you would actually impact the overall car parking allocation to the residential component of the development, because 2 bays is acting as one. Does that make sense in terms of the hard numbers that we're providing? So the preference is, and it's been what Felipe's done is designed this development with that in mind. So it makes sense that all the residential bays are kept together behind that secure line.
So I understand your comment in relation to the tandem parking. My question, I suppose, was specifically in relation to the single bay parking within the gate area, noting the earlier comments that you've made both in your submission and today, relating how tandem parking functions attached to the same entity, whether it be unit, whether it be commercial. So my question was specifically regarding the ability for bays within the secure area that are single bays to be for commercial. And my specific question was in relation to the concerns raised in the submission about the rationale, which was concerns regarding security. And I didn't understand what the security issue was for commercial, not visitor, but for commercial parking.
If I might just add as well, we've also got storerooms that sit adjacent to those residential bays on the ground floor. So there is we want to be able to allocate those storerooms to the apartments for residents. Not ideal having a commercial bay that sits adjacent to a storeroom. First of all, accessing that storeroom, whatever's stored in that storeroom as well. If it's allowing people to come in past the gates that don't use those storerooms is not ideal from a configuration and from a safety and security point of view. We want to be able to allocate those storerooms directly to the residents.
I think it's important to mention that it's us trying to find the right balance between how much commercial we do and how much residential we provide. We don't really have a sort of oversupply of residential base at the moment. It's very tight, and that is just the condition of where probably the market is at the moment and this particular precinct along Great Eastern Highway. So it's us trying to find the right balance between how much we have to allocate to residential and how much we can allocate to that sort of commercial sort of spaces on the ground floor, understanding that there is a provision on the street for those sort of shortfall that we might have within the building.
Were you able to do any analysis of the utilisation of visitor parking in other developments in the area?
Want to speak about that?
Well, no, we haven't done that. Obviously it's something that could be done, but that hasn't been done at this point. But just in addition to the question regarding security, it was more that particular aspect was more aimed on the parking provision being proposed in the RAR, which was talking about additional visitor parking for these various uses. So obviously that's what generated the potential security issue. If the bays were allocated specifically to, for example, the manager of one of the office tenants, and he had a clicker and he was able to, or she could go in and out of that area, that in itself is less of a security issue. But then we start running into utilisation issues. So obviously we now have a bay that's been allocated to an office use that potentially will only be used for 8 hours a day on weekdays and not at all on weekends. Whereas if you position those bays outside of the security fence, then that bay can all of a sudden be used by food and beverage visitors on a Saturday or a Sunday or after hours, etc. So that was the main rationale behind wanting everything other than residential beyond the gate. But if we were forced to allocate those bays to either food and beverage or office/commercial visitor parking, then that's what introduced the security concern, because if it was visitor parking, then obviously the gate would need to be removed. So
A final question, public users, Peter. Can you clarify for me that in your documentation you provided, you've obviously given us a nice table in relation to parking. And from this material, you have proposed that for every single bedroom dwelling, there is a bay each, and that the two bedrooms, some of the two bedrooms that get two bays. And are those the ones that specifically align up? Am I correct in reading your material that's the lining up of the tandem bays for which you attribute to the two bays to those units? Is that how it lines up correctly?
Yes, we'll be allocating the tandem base to the 2-bedroom units. Not all of the 2-bedroom units will have a tandem bay or two parking spots, but the tandem base will be allocated to the 2-bedroom.
So the units that get the two bays are essentially only those where they're tandem. Not,
that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Not single bays that have somebody has two
That's right.
single
Yeah,
bays.
no, that's right.
So it specifically lines up.
Yeah.
And I
that's
think,
right.
I think if you guys probably go through the sort of actually mix that is being proposed on the building, is very 1x1s and 2x2s for a large portion. I actually believe that we didn't even have any 3x2s, and the reason is just probably where the market sits in this particular sort of location, when there is no appetite for large apartments. So it's very 1x1s and 2x2s, and the 2x2s will just, as Peter mentioned, just get a tandem bay when there is a large sort of footprint for those 2x2s.
Councillor Marks, did you have a question?
I'm interested in listening to the conversation that's going on, especially about security over a long period of time.
Got a question?
Yeah, not really. I think I've sort of heard what you're saying. Can I get this right? That what you're saying is that you feel that visitor parking provides a lack of safety for the building. Is that correct?
No, that hasn't been the
If
suggestion.
you put it behind the gates.
It's about the mix between commercial parking being behind a gate with residential parking, especially when there is provision of stores or residential users in front of the commercial base.
Right. I've also heard that you feel that there is adequate street parking, and that you've done a survey which suggests there's 17 parking bays been free on weekdays, and you've been able to locate these bays. Is that correct?
yes.
Right. I must admit that's the first time I've ever heard anyone suggest there was plenty of street parking down in the Springs. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mayor Rossi.
Thank you. Along the same lines with street parking, I know the area very, very well. Were the 17 bays including Cracknell Park car park, which is a large car park at the very top?
Yes, they were.
And you expect people to walk from there down to your new development?
Yeah, it's only about 280 metres straight line distance.
Straight line, but there's not a straight line there, is there?
No, but it would still be within even the convoluted route would still be within a 400-metre walkable catchment, which is considered perfectly fine as far as walking is concerned.
Interesting. Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll move to the officers.
Thank you.
Right, some space there. Got Brandon, Pang and Nick Reddy available. Gents, did you want to make a couple? We've read the material, so there's probably no need for a major presentation, but did you want to make some comments about what you've heard so far, or go straight to questions?
Happy to go straight to questions.
Okay then, all right. Panel members, questions? Yes, Mayor Rossi.
Just concerned that the people presenting have just said they weren't aware of the what we're requiring for parking until the R&R came out. Is that normal practice? Surely, why didn't we sit down with them and say, what about adjusting it here and there? Which I thought would have happened. So I'm a bit surprised. I want to know what's the actual procedure that was followed. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair. So in ordinary case, if I suppose the change or resulting condition results in a significant redesign, then that's certainly something we would engage with the applicant throughout the assessment process. However, if we focus on the condition 3 and the parking number that's required and also parking that's actually proposed, in totality, there's an overall surplus. So we see that this is more a parking allocation matter. Now, how obviously the applicant, implements or approach that condition, that really is up to them how they deal with the allocation. So we didn't see there was a need for any consideration there. And that obviously is then reflected in our initial recommendation for approval with the condition.
Okay, follow-up question. It was mentioned that in the 17 average bays available during the day, they used Cracknell Park car bay. Do you feel that's appropriate considering the distance?
Through the chair, I suppose just echoing what I believe the consulting engineer said, from I suppose a planning perspective, if it is within a 400-meter distance, that while that might be an acceptable walkable distance, however, our consideration, the city's consideration, is purely on the bays that are available on the site, and really, for them to explore the allocation.
Okay. And the last question from me is, at this stage, the tandem bays, was that taken into consideration when you did your new calculation of bays?
Yeah, through the chair, that's certainly something that we consider, and I'll go back again to, and probably the deputy presiding member somewhat may or may not have touched on it previously with a question is, I suppose, again, it comes down to the allocation of the bays.
So you haven't really answered the question. Was that considered? Sorry, I'm not too sure. You sort of referred to the second person, but was that considered when you did your calculation, please?
Yes,
Right,
that was considered.
Great, thank you.
Further questions from the panel members? Yes, Councillor Marks.
I'm interested in whether you've actually spoken with the proponents prior to this meeting. Have you, when you changed your allocations and presented it to them, I presume by email or something, have you ever actually spoken to them about this before you've come here?
So just to clarify, do you mean before this meeting or before the submission of the report?
Before this meeting.
So before this meeting, the applicant has contacted myself, really was just about what their position is and what, which is what's reflected on their submission. But then,
So from what I gathered from the proponent, they knew nothing of this virtually until days before the meeting, or might have been a week or something, I don't know. But very, very close to the meeting, a large change like this, which they're suggesting puts their whole development in jeopardy, one would have thought that maybe either they would come to you and say, look, we need to speak to you before we actually go to the DAP, or you would say to them, no, this is a big change. You need to talk to us, because this sounds to me like it's a position where you've got the double bays there that can only be used by someone who more or less is using the two of them. So a unit that has the two bays to use the double bay that's there. So they're in a position where they have difficulty changing this. I'm just not certain if they haven't had a chance to really look at this properly, and suddenly we spring it on them, or the officers.
Councillor Marks, you have a
Well, I'm just worried that the proponent hasn't had a chance to do anything. It's sort of been presented to him and said, well, here it is. We'll take it to the DAP. Now, it's not up to us to tell him what to do, and it's
So what's your question?
Well, the question is, should this be deferred?
Oh, that's
Until such time as they've all had a talk, because
That's a
I don't
decision
think this is correct.
for the panel. Okay, thank you. Further questions? Yes.
Thank you. My question goes directly to the issue of parking. I note that Urbanist have provided a very concise summary and clearly outlines that the one-bedroom units are one parking bay per one-bedroom unit, but that as per the calculation under the R code, there is a surplus. They don't have to provide that many. Likewise, for the two-bedroom units, there is a surplus. They don't have to provide that many. My question in that context is specifically from a planning perspective. What do you say the concerns are or the issues are in changing some of those bays to commercial and the impact that residential might have regularly to park within the public domain or alternatively within the visitor parking? I suppose I'm trying to get my head around the allocation of specific bays, permanent users, the residential permanent users, as opposed to separate, providing those bays, removing those as residential and providing them as commercial, non-exclusive. What do you see the impact is in terms of the street? Or impact just generally in terms of parking?
I might jump in here, thank you, through the chair. It's not uncommon for mixed-use developments to have no security gates at all. In this case here, there is gates, and they could have, proposing management arrangements, so where they may close during certain hours outside of business hours. It's just not an uncommon scenario to have both residential and commercial bays in the same area operating at the same time.
Thank you. My question is more around the relocation or the reconsideration of dedicated parking, which is what the applicant's asking for, dedicated parking for residential, and removing that from residential and providing it to commercial, therefore having some units without parking, and the resultant impact would be within the public domain. Is there issues or concerns that you have from a planning perspective in relation to that shift?
Yeah, so through the chair, I guess the fundamental matter we're dealing with here is from a planning perspective, they're required for the residential bay at this point in time, they're proposing a significant surplus for the residential bay. And I suppose I can't speak to the impact of it because from a planning perspective, our consideration is what's required versus what they've provided. So, and this is where condition 3, you'll note, the residential bay, the total residential bay, the number that we've proposed in condition 3 still results in a surplus to what's actually required by the R codes. So in terms of impact on the street, I can't speak to that. What I can perhaps add and I don't think was brought or mentioned, is the city, I understand, has late last year or earlier this year implemented on-street parking. I think, certainly don't quote me on it, I think it's around 2 hours to perhaps like 4 hours parking limit. So I suppose, I guess, to put it directly, city doesn't want to have end up in a situation where there's a significant shortfall in commercial bay, and then the users or patrons of those commercial units having to be forced to park on the street and then open them to the opportunity of getting infringed for parking over time. So that's perhaps, in the reverse, that's why we are recommending condition 3 to minimize such impacts.
Thank you. I have a final question, and it is in relation to the applicant's requested change to condition 3. Do you have any comments you wish to make in relation to that requested alternate wording?
So I guess the only comment I would have to that is, well, the numbers that they have proposed in the alternate condition is the numbers are identical to their current allocation on the plan. So it's not achieving really anything from our perspective. Yeah, and we maintain our position that the condition 3 the city put forward as a more balanced approach. And I'll probably emphasize as well, the parking numbers that the city put forward in condition 3, you'll note the commercial base, the numbers that we're seeking is not even achieving the minimum commercial base. So it's allowing some, recognizing there's probably some need for the residents and still allowing some flexibility for variations to commercial base.
No, that's
Further questions? Just a couple of questions on the conditions, Brandon. Sorry. The 7C talks about landscaping of the street verge in compliance with the consolidated local law. Is that a planning condition thing?
Yeah.
So
Set it up. Yeah, because the street verge, as we see it, forms part of.
yes, I understand that, but the consolidated local law is coming out of another legal framework, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. In relation to condition 12, there's been lately a change from the DAP point of view in terms of how that condition is worded. I don't know if you're aware of that, but
Yeah.
about getting consent now.
Yeah.
So that will probably be dealt with if we go down that path. 24 and Vice Note 5 to do with signage. And condition 24 talks about the signage strategy prepared and submitted for approval and then implemented. Whereas Vice Note 5 says signage is not approved as part of this application. So I'm just a bit puzzled as to, is condition 24 saying once you've got it approved, you can then implement it? Then Vice Note 5 saying no, you can't.
Through the chair, my understanding of I suppose I could see where that would arise, and happy enough. My understanding is the signage strategy conditions as relate to signage location that's shown on the plan. I suppose that's where the advice note is suggesting if there's any change in graphic or change in, might be the similar sign area, but suddenly it becomes illuminated, then obviously they'll need a separate application for it.
Okay. And then just finally, condition 11, should that link to an Australian standard?
Is that condition 11?
11, yeah.
Not. I can certainly see, yeah, benefit in linking that to an Australian standard for clarity purposes. However, that's something that the
You'll do
city,
anyway.
in assessing the lighting plan, will ensure that.
All right, thank you for that. No further questions of the officers? No, thank you. We'll move on then to the report, which has a recommendation for approval with a number of conditions and advice notes. I'm going to seek a mover and a seconder for that. Is there a mover for that report? That recommendation? Member Lafanti, thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Member Lee? Member Lafanti?
Thank you. I am supportive of the proposal. I think the development is an excellent development on what is quite difficult to site, particularly in an area that is already substantially developed. It's a very unusual site with both direct frontage to Great Eastern Highway as well as a sort of a side entry via Hawkes Street, Street, I think it's called. From my perspective, the design of the proposal with its 2 levels also works within the context of the site, noting that there is a substantial amount of development already occurred in that area, and this is one of the few sites that are remaining. I note there is a lower density, a lower height development in front of it, but as far as I'm concerned, this development appropriately addresses its location and context. The ground level design facing both streets is excellent, and I think that is commendable from a design perspective that the proposal has attempted to incorporate interactive ground level development. From my perspective, I do wish at this juncture to move an amendment. My amendment 1 is to modify condition 3 using the applicant's language, and I will speak to that if I get a seconder.
Is there a seconder for that? Happy. Member Lee, thank you. All right.
Thank you. I have considered the material presented by the applicant, the material provided by the city, as well as the discussion that we've had in today's meeting. I am satisfied that the argument from the applicant is both a sound argument with clear rationale, which reflects both the design, the apartment configuration and the apartment sizes. I do agree with the applicant's comment that tandem parking is essentially dedicated to a relevant unit. And I'm also satisfied that notwithstanding the proposal has a surplus of on-site parking, the allocation for one parking bay, a minimum of 1 parking bay per tenancy per unit, is appropriate in the context of this proposal and this site. Most particular, the commercial development is small. It is quite a small component of it, having a number of tenancies that front the ground level, and the capacity for parking, a reciprocal parking managed through a parking management plan, will appropriately address the scale and size of these units. I do agree there is some rationale and supported by a substantial other developments that small tenancies, particularly small F&B tenancies like cafes, are supported principally by the local community, whether it be residential or commercial, and that has a rationale in terms of the parking usage. I also note that having looked in the area myself, recently being out and looking at the area, there is some commercial in that area facing into the public domain, but a lot of the developments in that area are primarily residential, particularly in this location, and therefore I see there is a rationale that commercial operations, small commercial operations, particularly in the F&B, would also attract an element of a local catchment in terms of functioning. I would also concur that small F&B, particularly a cafe, is typically a day activity and therefore providing sufficient parking for the surrounding area. From my perspective, the provision of permanent parking for units is appropriate rather than having those units pushing into the public domain. There is limited parking in that public domain. It is clearly indented, embayed parking, and that given the location of the whole precinct, there really is not very much opportunity to park, particularly for regular residentials, other than quite a substantial distance if there is no availability specifically for parking. So I support this change.
Thank you. Member Lee as seconder.
Yeah, well, I won't repeat all things the deputy presiding member has been through. I agree with all of them. This is a very good development. Understanding architecture, I understand trying to instigate the change to the parking requirement would not work. It would be very, very difficult to get to work in this position, and I'd hate to see a quality project like this held up by a late requirement. That's unusual for Belmont. Not unusual for lots of councils, but it's unusual for Belmont. But I think the project as it is very good. Seems to be ready to go, and we have a desperate need for housing in locations like this. So, and it is a good development. So I'm quite happy to support it.
Further speakers on the amendment? Councillor Marks, you look like you want to say something.
I'm just a bit. I think two things disappoint me in this. Number one, which when I first read it, was the fact that the Baptist church next to it is suddenly going to have a nil setback to the building alongside it, where it's.
This is about the amendment.
Pardon?
This is about the amendment.
Oh, the amendment. Sorry.
Yes.
No, no, I haven't to say about the amendment. Sorry.
Right. Look, I fully support the amendment. And why I asked about whether or not whether the applicants had looked into other apartment buildings in the area and the utilisation of visitor parking is because I have a friend who leases an apartment not very far from there in another development, and I've probably visited in the last year a few times, and every time I've gone there, this huge area of visitor parking is basically empty. I've never had any trouble getting visitor parking there. So I suspect that's fairly common in these developments, that people tend not to go into the developments looking for the visitor parking. So I'm supportive of the amendment. No further speakers. I'll back to the mover to close the debate on the amendment.
No further comments on the
I'll
amendment.
put the amendment. All in favour? Against?
Oh, sorry.
All in favour?
I beg your pardon.
Against? That's carried 3-2. Thank you. Still with you.
I think I've probably said most of what I want. The form, scale and design and height is appropriate, has a good street interface. It is good to see further development being, residential development occurring in this corridor, and it has got excellent location and proximity to Great Eastern Highway, providing public transport and other modes of transport. I note the proposed development is under its plot ratio that could be within this precinct, and so from my perspective, the form and scale is appropriate.
Thank you. Member Lee is seconder for the substantive motion. Sorry, you're the seconder?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Whether you want to speak on these substantive? No. Further speakers on the substantive motion for us? Councillor Marks?
As I said, I think I started at the wrong point. The actual nil setback on the northerly aspect, which is alongside the Baptist church, disappoints me that the Baptist church all of a sudden has got virtually nowhere to go. Thank goodness its development is set back indented within it, which gives them a couple of metres to move, I guess. But that disappoints me. I understand that it's legal. It still disappoints me on behalf of the Baptist church. But the other thing, of course, was parking, which to me doesn't sound like they've actually been any work taken between the city and the proponent to come up with what I think would be a good solution. What the city is talking about, I think, is correct, whether they laid reciprocal arrangements for the parking, but disappointing.
Thank you. Mayor Rossi.
Yes. Look, I think this development looks amazing, but I worry about that location it's in. As Councillor Marks has already covered, the nil setback to the development at the back, the church building. The parking issues I can't get over. That is a little cul-de-sac. We're going to have problems there, I believe. But yeah, and at the two, as Phil has said, between the council and the developers, they've not discussed this out. That worries me. So I won't be voting for it.
Thank you. Look, I'm very supportive of the proposal. It aligns with the planning framework and the desired objectives and outcomes for the area. The RAR thoroughly evaluates the proposal against these provisions and requirements in the local planning scheme, the R codes, and the recently adopted local planning policy 20. It's a build to rent development, providing good range of residential typologies that have generous spaces. The balconies, in most part, are spacious and very functional for the unit size. Development addresses the streets, providing good active frontages provided by the cafe and office uses. The landscaping with extensive deep soil areas and the communal open spaces seem to work very well. The proposed development has gone, and my thing has now, where is that? My development has gone through the DRP process and to a very large extent been supported by the panel, or that panel. As a result, there were some additional changes to the plans to address the DRP comments in some areas, and other areas conditions have been recommended to address those. There are some aspects of the proposed development which require the exercise of discretion in relation to setbacks and landscaping. I agree with the officer's comments and support the discretion requested. We've dealt with the parking issues, and I suppose, and I've made this comment before, if the concept that public transport is readily available and therefore we can have less visitor parking, then that also would apply to the amount of resident parking in a development. And I'm happy to support what's transpiring, but I think we've got situations where the oversupply of resident parking is more the issue to me than the undersupply of visitor parking. However, I'm supportive of the proposal as it is. I also note the submissions made and the issues that have been raised, and these have been addressed in the RAR. This is a quality development well suited to this location, adding much needed housing stock. Thank you. Back to the mover to close debate.
I think I'd probably only summarise in my final comments would be in relation to parking. Note this has been the most contentious issue in relation to this proposal, and I appreciate the site's location in its context regarding level of public transport options. The challenge we always seem to have is the balancing of both commercial and residential, and we are continuing on the journey to have less demand and reliance on vehicles. However, in this particular case, I am of the view that the provision of dedicated parking for the regular, permanent and frequent users has been balanced against the low peak intermittent parking requirements of the much smaller commercial, and from my perspective I am comfortable with that proposal. I would however like to at this juncture, as the mover, I have a right to move a condition, is that correct?
Correct.
And I would like to move, just before I complete my closing marks, condition 12. And I'd like to reword this condition, particularly following our standard provisions. Officers may be familiar with this, that from the DAP's perspective, we have been supporting the provision of a notification on the title, but including the words and the language that it is the responsibility of the city to impose, and the obligation is on the applicant to give approval for that to be put in place. And we would then use that language regarding the provision of the notification. This has been brought about through conversations and information that's been discussed in previous DAP meetings regarding the legislation and the function of that legislation that allows the imposition of conditions of this nature are currently written in a language that requires the imposition be the agency to be essentially a local government or a state agency that has the authority to impose these provisions. So I would at this juncture like to move the modification that this is the obligation of the city to impose, should they wish to. The applicant's obligation is to provide consent for the notification to be added relating to its notification within a transport corridor.
Would you like me to read out the?
Yes, that would be great if you've got the language specifically there.
The condition 12 be amended to read: prior to occupation, the landowner shall provide their consent to the local government for a notification pursuant to section 70A of the Transfer of Land Act 1893 is to be placed on the certificate of title of the subject land advising, and it advises the lots are situated in the vicinity of a transport corridor and are currently affected or may in the future be affected by transport noise. And then an additional advice note stating that condition number 12 is not imposing an obligation on the local government. If the local government chooses to lodge a notification under section 70A, the proponent's obligation is to give their consent to the local government application and nothing more. So I'm seeking a seconder for that. I'm happy to second that. Is there any discussion on that?
Yes. I didn't quite understand this in so much as this is a virtual obligation that says, you know, there is going to be there is a strong possibility there will be transport noise.
Yes.
Now, if the owner says, no, I don't want that put on my titles, what happens if someone within the unit goes to court and takes either the owner or the council to court for not advising them of transport noise?
Councillor Marks, the wording in the proposed condition is they shall give consent to that notification being lodged on the title. The Transfer of Land Act, I understand, requires a public authority to lodge notification on title, and it can't be done by the applicant. So all the applicant can do is give consent to the local government for that to be lodged. It's then for the local government to lodge that notification.
Right. So he has no power, even if he says, I don't want it there, he really has no power to stop it happening. Is that correct?
No, that's right. Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Rossi.
Just a clarification, you're asking us to vote on 12 only, the change, or
Yes.
the overall? Because
12 only.
the member was summing up, then suddenly she stopped and could you pass
That's
the
right.
paper? I'm just a bit confused. I want to make sure what I'm voting for.
Our standing orders allow,
Yep.
in closing debate, for a member to still make an amendment.
Okay, thank you. So
Thank
we just, for number 12 only?
Number 12
Thank you.
only, yes.
Right.
All right. I'll now put that amendment. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Want to finish closing debate?
Thank you. I have made most of my comments in relation to closing debate. I don't think I have anything additional to add, and therefore have. So I will just say that generally I'm satisfied that the proposal meets the planning framework that includes both the Belmont scheme, the special precinct development, and the structure plan that covers the area. So from my perspective, I'm comfortable with the proposal.
Thank you. I'll put the motion as amended. All in favour? Against? That's 4-1. Thank you. Thank you to Mayor Rossi and Councillor Marks for your attendance. Yeah, we'll just do a handover.
What? What?
Good go. Okay, thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody, and particular welcome to Councillor Jeffrey Irvine and Councillor Sonia Heath. I believe it's Councillor Irvine's first DAP meeting, so.
Thank you, mine too.
And yours too. Okay, thank you. We just need declarations of due consideration. So can panel members, by a show of hands, indicate that they have considered all the documentation within Part C of the agenda and Part C related information? Yes, okay, that's everyone. Thank you very much. Disclosures of interest. Councillors, did this go to a council meeting or a briefing session of council? No?
No.
Okay. Are there any disclosures of interest?
No.
No. No, okay.
No.
Thank you very much. Have now moving to the item, which is lots 20 and 19 Salvado Road, Cottesloe, 8 multiple dwellings and separate private garden with amenity. We have presenters here in person. We've got Julius Mathis and Dan Lays from SLR Consultants. So we'll go to Julius Mathis first, and you have 3 minutes, Julius.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Julius and my wife, Catherine. We're the owners of 10A Salvado, and we thank you for this opportunity to speak this morning. We are supportive of a quality development on number 6 and 8, which we understand is what the application will do. However, we believe this application should only be approved with some amendments as follows: the use of the natural ground level, use of Cottesloe setbacks, restriction on the height of screen planting. We believe these amendments will temper the impact of the development on the local amenity. You have our written submission, but in summary, our key point is we believe the proposal seeks to create an unfair advantage for the applicant. This is achieved by natural ground level being replaced by a proposed theoretical interpolated ground level that clearly never existed. This creates a somewhat bizarre outcome where number 8 is higher than number 10A. And I refer to my diagram 1 in our submission. We believe this level is incorrect, and there's no reason this should be accepted or indeed approved. Additionally, the building setback is forward of the front and side setback, which are set by council. This imposes an undue height, bulk and scale element. This is clearly demonstrated in the applicant's drawing KHA drawing number 2005, eastern elevation, which negatively impacts on the amenity, on our amenity and the neighbourhood amenity. We note that the applicant has stated in their submission that 10A encroaches on the 6 metre setback. What the applicant has not said is that while our garage entrance does encroach, it is, however, on the eastern front of the building and below the floor level of number 12 Salvado, our neighbour on the eastern side, and therefore does not impact line of sight. Further, the bulk of our building and the front balcony complies with the 6 metre setback requirement. The fill proposed on the eastern boundary to bring the height up to the theoretical natural ground level and the proposed screen planting would result in trees taller than our residence, and that is shown in my diagram number 2. We understand that no one owns a view. However, no one has the right to block the views by exceeding the height limitations and encroaching on the side and front setbacks established by the Town of Cottesloe planning scheme, a scheme which is in place for the benefit and orderly development of the area and for the protection of amenity. We are seeking the panel require amendments reflecting these comments. Firstly, return to the natural ground level, return to the Cottesloe setbacks, and place restrictions on the height of screening plans. We thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you very much. Panel members, questions of the presenter? Councillor Heath, did you have any questions?
I thank you.
No. Member Lafante.
Thank you. I have a question. It goes specifically to your set of plans. I'm wondering if we can get that plan up. It's page 8 in the related material for Cottesloe, and it shows the subject site and the neighbouring sites. It's got 4 little houses shown on. Yep. Keep going. Up. Yeah, one up. Next one up. That's the one I'm after. Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I'm really interested in getting a good handle on understanding the natural ground levels, the interpolated natural ground level. This plan shows, my read of it, shows what you say is the natural ground level relative to your house as the property falls towards Marine Parade. Sure. And the orange or pink, whichever colour you want to call it, is what you say the development plans show as what will become the natural ground level for building. Is that correct?
This is what they're saying is the interpolated ground.
Sorry.
Level. That's correct, yes.
Okay. And on your site, have you used the natural ground levels for your development, or have you altered those levels, particularly in either fill or cut?
No. We bought an existing site that had been previously developed and built on that site. We didn't change the ground level, and we used the natural ground level as is shown in that diagram.
Thank you. Could we go to the next plan, please? These have been very clear from my perspective in understanding what your comments were. Can you scan down a little bit more so I can see the fill? Is this also reflecting, again, the plan the previous plan showed height level relative to property boundary up front, is that correct?
Yes.
And so
what is described at the natural ground level, which would be, I believe, I'm not a town planner or an architect, but I believe that would be the property boundary, yes.
Okay, so this plan here, where do you say this, is this the 4 metre back point, the 6 metre back point on your plan showing fill and level? This plan here reads to me that the fill on the development side is at 16.5, that's the number shown, and on your side it shows floor level as a metre above that. Do you say that, is that what you're saying is correct, which seems to be inconsistent with what you're saying on the plan above? Could I just get clarity from you as to what these two, how you the key messages for us on these plans?
What I'm saying is that my understanding, again, I'm not an architect or an engineer, my understanding is the interpolated ground level has been used as part of a justification for fill along the eastern boundary. This diagram is taken from the applicant's drawing, and perhaps rather than me trying to explain their drawing, it might be better that they do, but my understanding is that they will fill going, this is the southern end of the boundary going and north, and they will fill going north and raise the ground level as they go along, which raises along our eastern boundary.
Thank you. And I understand from the material you've provided us, one of the key concerns is commentary about the amenity impact associated with the filling of the ground level and the bringing forward of the building in terms of both street presence and the vista. Is that
correct?
A summary of the key concern?
And I pointed to the applicant's drawing, which is an eastern elevation of their proposal, and you can see on that they're bringing quite a lot of scale forward and up compared to the existing building.
Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you. In relation to the 6 metre setback, do you understand that that is not an absolute requirement of the local government. The wording says local government may require that.
Yes, I understand the local government
Not a-
does have some discretion.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
They didn't use that in our instance, but
No.
they are using it now, and we are going to be negatively impacted by it.
Did you apply for discretion?
Yes,
Okay, interesting.
and all we got was that little bit for our garage.
Yeah, okay. All right, no further questions? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks for your time.
Move to Dan Lees. But Nigel Simpson, is it? From MNG Surveyors. So Dan, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, panel members. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in support of the approval of temporary apartment redevelopment in accordance with the officer recommendation. We note the town of Cottesloe has recommended approval subject to standard conditions, which we are comfortable with, and your approval today is respectfully requested. The town's report before you covers all of the relevant matters, and in particular the matters just raised by the previous speaker. Natural ground level has been established based on the deemed provisions definition of site levels preceding development by a licensed land surveyor, Nigel Simpson from MIDAP Surveys, who sits here beside me. In any case, the proposed building height is broadly consistent with the existing older apartment buildings on the site, and in fact lower than the building closest to the eastern boundary adjacent to neighbouring dwelling at 10A. The street height elevation drawing that was just mentioned by the previous speaker, it shows the proposed height relative to the 7 metre height control. The proposed street setback is 6 metres to the main building line and 4 metres to the covered terraces. This setback accords with the established character of Salvato Street, with setbacks ranging from 2 metres to around 6.5 metres for recent houses in the street, and some adjoining properties being set back approximately 4 metres from the street. In response to one of the neighbours' concerns, visually permeable balustrading will be implemented to the easternmost balconies, which is to be secured via a recommended condition. The proposed eastern boundary setback responds to the existing and the likely future context, with this common boundary containing a battle axe driveway to the strata titled rear house at 10B Salvato Street. This results in what we say is an appropriate building to building separation of approximately 8.5 metres between this proposal and the neighbouring front house at 10A Salvato Street, as well as an absence of any visual privacy issues. In simple terms, this is a proposed development of the existing legacy apartment buildings that will result in a high quality built form outcome that is consistent with the strategic intent of the town's planning framework. It will improve the existing site condition and provide tangible benefits to the streetscape character and community, which we feel is befitting of this Cottesloe location. The proposal will result in a significant increase in urban tree canopy and deep soil area across the site. It's actually a slight reduction in the built footprint compared to the existing apartment buildings and rear carports and this apartment building. This proposal has the opportunity to replace ageing building stock with a well-considered and contextually responsive contemporary high-quality design, and it introduces a mix of 1 to 3 bedroom apartments. This will contribute to greater housing diversity and respond to a range of household structures and changing demographic needs, whilst reflecting the established character of this coastal locality. Thank you for your time. Your approval today is respectfully requested.
Thank you, Dan. Questions of Dan or the Nigel Simpson from panel members? Member Lafanti.
Thank you. My questions at this juncture are all to do with the the ground level and the calculation or the method of undertaking that ground level. And so I'd like to go to some of the plans to get clarity. We've seen the material that's been provided by the neighbour, which shows ground levels. I've seen the material that you've put in here, which shows a level, contour levels dropping uniformly down the site. and I've been to the site myself and had a good look at what's happening on the site. So can we speak directly to the plans and get some real clarity about what you say are the differences between the ground levels and what we've received today? On the plan, I note that your plans did not show a street elevation in the same manner as the NAIP has just given, which shows where your sites sit as a finished ground level compared to the neighbouring site. Can you speak to that or point to a plan in your package that would show the difference? And I suppose for me, the reason I'm labouring on this is it's a critical component that drives the decisions that we make around building height and form and those other bits and pieces. So can you, possibly not yourself, Dan, it might be from yourself, Nigel, can you go to the plans and talk about that? And I'm kind of interested in why there's not a set of plans that shows this site relative to neighbour other than your perspective.
Sure. I might just draw a panel view of plans to build. Is it possible to pull up the drawing set? Some of the early plans, so there's a site plan and there's a ground floor site plan. In the agenda, yeah.
It'll be in attachment 1, technical plans.
Attachment 1.
If you just start from there, we can scroll down as you need it. You want to just let the actually know what plan you want us to go to?
Yeah, so maybe if we start, yeah, so it is attachment 1 to your agenda and it is page 2 of the actual drawing set.
And what's your drawing number? What's your drawing title?
Drawing title is site plan. Drawing number is 0050.
Got it. Yep, thank you.
Perhaps, I guess, just starting here in terms of the proposed development. This sets out, and if you zoom in, you can see the various spot heights along the Salvato Street boundary, as well as the eastern boundary, common boundary to 10A. There are numerous notations which refer to both existing NGL, which is existing natural ground level, and then below each of those is proposed natural ground level. So you can see there, this is actually setting, perhaps if we can zoom in, if that's possible, actually.
So on this plan, where you say existing natural ground level, and in one of them says plus 15 point whatever, and the corresponding is proposed NGL plus 15, slightly more than, or slightly less in some cases, than the natural. Could you speak to the rationale of this site, which from my perspective, going to site, these properties drop towards Marine Parade. How does, and this plan doesn't show the finished floor level of the adjoining site at 10A. Can you speak about how this proposed NGL reflects what I suppose I observed on site, which was a drop towards Marine Parade? Why is the natural ground level so close to the in dimension to the natural ground level of the adjoining property, given that they all drop away? I'm curious to kind of understand that.
Moving to I'll actually show the levels dropping down from the east to the west. If we start at the easternmost spot level on the Salvato Street frontage, existing NGL 16.72, and then coming across to the western end of the site, existing natural ground level 14.98 along the Salvato Street frontage.
So when we move back along the site, those sites, so that's about a 1.5 metre drop along the property.
The natural drop along Salvato Street.
So when I was at the site, they've got the street, and then the properties seem to drop back. So they fall towards Marine Parade and they fall towards the road at the back. I can't think of the name of the road at the back of the top of my head. I'm trying to get a handle on this material. So you're saying it drops down the street, but it doesn't drop towards the rear, is that correct?
It does drop towards the rear. Sorry, I just wanted to establish, looking at from east to west.
Yeah.
East to west to start with,
Yeah.
it does also drop south to north. So it drops from the street to the back of the site. It drops about 5.5 metres from the, I suppose, the high point of the site, which is in the southeast corner, to the low point of the site, which is the west corner.
And can you continue on these plans? Because there are some, for me, I actually have some concerns about the arriving at the levels that you've got with what I've already indicated as the drop down. And I'm interested in understanding that aspect. So if you go to your, have you got a plan, I suppose, that shows the streetscape and the finished levels in the same manner that we've just seen?
Yes, we do have a street practice. So I take you to, drawing title is North-South Elevations Overlay. The drawing number is 2004.
2004. Okay, yep, so can you speak to that one?
So this is a street elevation of the proposed development and has a few overlays on it. So we've got the thick black line at the bottom of the drawing, which is the proposed ground level at the boundary. And this also overlays the two existing apartment buildings of 6 and 8 Salvato Street, which is in the blue line. Just, I suppose, focusing on the drawing on the bottom of those two drawings.
Yep.
That we're talking to. So this shows the proposed development in that context, and you can see as natural ground level falls down towards Marine Parade, how part of the ground level. So where, if you can see apartment 4, which is at the eastern end of the site, this is very much set into the existing natural ground level, and then proposed floor level of the apartment building is continued across to its western side, where you can see apartment 1 at the ground floor. So this is really establishing how we've set the floor plate based on the ground level at the eastern side of the site, and continue that across to provide to avoid any stepped slab and ensure that there is universal access to these apartments and they're all at the same level.
So that eastern elevation overlay on plan 2205, which is what we're on, is that correct? We're on 2205? 2204.
Sorry, I was speaking to the north-south elevation at 2004, but if we move to the eastern.
So 2004, if I go to the northern elevation first, what you've told me shows me that the Salvato Road, 6 to 8 Salvato Road, shows the existing built form stepped quite into the building, into the site, with the blue line showing the existing development. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's right. The blue
And
line.
And the line that runs down the centre of the site, which has got a little hashed on it, which says essentially, that is where you say the natural ground level would be, which appears to be a whole story above that hatch line running through the centre of those sites. Is that what you're saying is the natural ground level at that point?
The term is, interpolated natural.
That's
ground
correct,
level,
but
which I might pass to Nigel to speak to, but the town's RAR addresses this on page 9 and makes reference to the deemed provisions and establishing natural ground level based on the definition of natural ground levels, so the levels of the site preceding development. And the town makes reference to a 1934 sewer plan or map, which is then the source data to determine what those levels are preceding any development on the site, because there hasn't been a previous development approval to establish ground levels on this site.
So I get that, but the town also says in its RAR, it's not able to verify the survey data. They're not a surveyor, and they don't have, and they haven't engaged a surveyor. So I understand where the town's coming from. I'm trying to understand this plan, and my starting point is the sites all drop down towards Marine Parade. So that was my starting point going to site. My starting point was also to look at Landgate's Map Viewer Plus, just to get a bit of an idea as to what's happening. And the logic for me is that properties would naturally fall towards Marine Parade. These plans, I'm trying to get clarity as to, do they fall? I know you're saying you've done an extrapolation to come to that term, but I'm trying to wrap my head around whether this proposal on the site that's falling towards Marine Parade physically sits higher at ground level, proposed ground level, as you have extrapolated out from a technical perspective, higher than the ground level on the site, in my logic, would sit higher than it naturally. So that's the bit that I'm trying to get clarity of. And when I read the plans, I'm not quite following that. And I also see that you've got very regimented contour lines, which I'm not a surveyor. And I don't see a plan that shows me the street elevation in essentially the simplistic way that the neighbouring site has given a very simplistic drawing as to what would happen in the street. That's what I'm trying to get my head around, because that, for me, from a planning perspective, drives understanding height and where you take the point from height from, which is what the RAR is referring to. So it's really trying to drill down. So is that middle line on the north elevation overlay what, from a surveying perspective, you say is the extrapolated or intrapolated, or whatever the word is that you use? Is that what you say is the natural ground level on this site? And then how does it compare against the adjoining site at 10A?
So we talked, the council, like Dan said, we've got to take into account the 1934 Water Corp data. That's what they want for us to extrapolate to create the natural ground levels. When we looked at that data, the actual site, and all the sites have been already excavated. So to me, that wasn't what the city is looking at, natural ground level, because you've got different levels and there'll be quite different drops between adjoining properties north and south. Some land had already been levelled out and graded for garden purposes or building purposes. So we took the original ground levels along Marine Parade and streets of Evermore, and the natural ground levels along down that was shown on that map alongside data to create those contours that we've got. That's where the natural ground levels come from. So from the 1934, which is what the city asked us, we've got to use to create that natural. There was too much disturbance had already happened on site to actually use any of the contours, to use any of the spot levels in there. That's what I sort of
okay. So does this development sit on ground level, so not basement, but the ground level of the development? Does that sit higher than the neighbouring site? Has your analysis identified that the natural ground level falls from
the top all the way down the street to Marine Parade?
Yeah,
that's what I've shown in my contours.
So based on that, your or the neighbour would be below natural ground level. On your
interpolation,
yes.
it probably is here.
So the neighbours have just said to us they didn't do any cut. Are you saying that your
He hasn't done-
analysis has shown that the land has been cut?
No, he
And how
hasn't
did
done,
you
he
come
hasn't
to that?
bounded it, done cut from when he bought it, but we're just extrapolating what it was back from the 1934. I can't comment on what's happened for, after that, the contours that we've got to be, the extrapolated levels that we've got to use.
It's the diagram produced by.
Sorry, are you saying you've looked at a 1932 potential undeveloped land for the whole area and identified that as the starting point for your development, excluding what's happened on the neighbouring sites?
That's what we've got to use as part of the city's guidelines. Is that correct, Dan?
Well, in terms of establishing the level of the land before any development, as per the definition of natural ground level that's in the deemed provisions. In terms of the actual proposed change in levels, if we're spoken about the Salvato Street boundary, it might actually be good to look at moving back into the site along the eastern boundary.
Which number are you going to?
Go to drawing A1001.
A11.
The proposed ground floor plan.
Okay, yep, 1101,
So,
53,
yes, that's the one. So
ground
starting
floor plan.
at the bottom right corner, the driveway to the rear dwelling at 10B, which is the boundary interface here. So if you look at the XRL, so existing relative level or existing natural ground level along the driveway, which is on the neighbouring site, you can see that it drops from 16.5 metres back to around 15 metres as you move down the driveway.
Yep.
So 16.5 to 15. And then in terms of the proposed site works and proposed development on this development site, the proposed ground floor of the building is at 16.5. And then at the rear of the building, there's a proposed garden area, which is garden finished floor level of 15.433. And again, moving further to the rear of the site, proposed finished level of that rear garden of 16.45 metres. So
is that so that's sitting above, those numbers appear at ground level at the back to sit above the plans that show the neighbouring sites ground level at the front of their property, and your finished ground level of ground level also sits above the levels on the neighbouring property. So you're saying the extrapolated natural ground level as you've identified it reasonably sits above the neighbouring ground level and built form?
Talking about the interpolated level, yes, as distinct from talking about the proposed finished levels. So I was focusing my discussion on the proposed finished levels because it's the proposed finished levels that are broadly consistent with the existing levels on the neighbouring site. So that the town, the interpolated levels have simply been used for the purposes of assessing building height. But I had understood part of this discussion was about what are our proposed finished levels on our proposed development site relative to the existing levels of the neighbouring site.
Correct. Well, my basic question is, how does this site sit higher than the neighbouring site that sits above this, up the street from it, next door to it? That's what I'm trying to get my head around, and the rationale and the methodology that's used to get this site and therefore calculate level height sitting both at the ground level that you've identified and the finished floor level, on my interpretation of the plans, to sit higher than the neighbouring site that, when I went to site, the road dropped down to marine grade. So that's what I'm trying to get some clarity. You refer to going back to 1932 and the extra, how you interpret that, but it's quite difficult to clearly understand how that sits higher than the neighbouring site. Doing that analysis, you actually get a higher point than the neighbouring. And I'm not necessarily using a technical language, I'm just trying to be as clear as I can. But I don't actually get that, sorry.
That's right. No.
That's my trying to,
More
no, that's my main, all my questions are around trying to understand these two
Okay.
differences and how you came to those.
Are there any further questions from panel members? Councillor Irvine.
Thank you, through the chair. Just on the back of that, that line of questioning, given that I went by the site a couple of days ago, given that number 6 has already been demolished under the approval in 2025, would it not be therefore possible to understand 100% the elevations, given that you've got access, rather than looking at some 1934 plan, so that the elevations of the neighbours, and in particular the two neighbours that have raised concerns, could be also shown on a drawing?
So what we have done is the overlay elevations do have that blue line overlay of the existing or previously existing buildings at 6 and 8 Salvado. So that has been used as a point of reference.
So it's still the 1934 baseline, but and the town doesn't have survey resources, but we have a demolished property. We could potentially apply those resources and get the factual rather than interpolated elevation for review, basically.
Well, I mean, I guess those levels that are there today, it's just there's no record of what the level changes have been since the site was in a pre-development state, and what levels were there in association with the 6, the number 6 building.
Thank you. I understand that. Thank you.
Any further questions?
No, thank you.
No further questions? Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for that. We'll move to the officers. Ed Druitt or Sonia Hayes and Paul Nielsen sitting at the back. Okay. There's probably no need to make a full presentation. We've read the material. But are there some comments you want to make based on what you've heard so far today?
Look, I think the issue about natural ground level has been a dominant consideration of the town, and as you can see in the RAR report, the time it's taken for us to do this assessment process has resulted in basically having to discuss extensively with the surveyors and the applicants regarding how their terminology or how their determination of this natural ground level has come about. As a result of that, basically we've reviewed 5 different survey plans, and as it's been explained, the town doesn't have its own surveyor resources to be able to check each one. In terms of reference to 1934 water court plans, I mean, certainly that's a due regard that people can have, but we don't have a specific policy under the town's provisions for determination of natural ground level. It is simply a question of using the regulation definition. So I think going to Councillor Irvine's point, which was quite relevant in regards to, well, when you've demolished existing buildings, can we not sort of just survey those levels? The difficulty with that is that under the definition of the regs, the levels have actually got to be pre-approved. So we've actually got to have a previous development approval that actually showed site levels at those levels. And we've done research to find the original approval for the existing buildings, and it did not have specific site levels. And hence the reason we kind of got into this difficulty about having to try to interpolate then the average or the natural ground level for the site. I think importantly also, so we did ask specifically for the surveyor to provide a statement with their survey plan, the final survey plan, to provide their justification and rationale as to how they actually came to that conclusion. Because initially we were a little bit sceptical in terms of that process. But I think also consideration of the fact that, as been mentioned, our scheme provisions talk about building height and wall heights. They're not talking about the landscaping areas at the back or anything else like that, which are really done under the R code provisions in terms of design principles. So in terms of the building itself, and particularly looking at the eastern elevation, so its relationship to the eastern 10A property, you'll actually see that it is lower because they are trying to have one level across the whole site. So the actual elevation there would be around 7 metres, which would be compliant under our scheme. If you're going to discuss any discretion, then it's potentially on the western side. However, that is some distance away from the other properties, and none of the other neighbours that we advertised to put any submissions in.
Okay, happy to take questions then. So, panel members' questions. No?
I'm interested in your comments about the levels on the eastern side, probably between this and number 10. Can you were saying that the rear of the site, where the garden space is a ground level that's consistent with what you say the area should be? You're saying that?
No, so through the chair, so I'm saying the garden areas are not subject to the building height provisions of wall heights and building height. They're an area which is basically filled and can be done under site fill.
So under site fill, what do you say the site fill change is being sought?
I think it's detailed in the actual RAR report in terms of the justification. So we've expressed that there is a discretion being sought in terms of not meeting deemed compliant provisions under the R codes, but we've provided the rationale as to why we think they can be supported for those rear garden areas.
And do you, on the information provided, what's your position about the site levels between the site levels proposed, at finished floor levels proposed, relative to discretion sought? So are you saying that the site levels, there is marginal or no discretion being sought for height, and that is being sought is within acceptable levels?
We're saying that in terms of the actual building itself, the proposed apartments, there, if you took the existing levels along Savalda Street at the boundary, and you sort of interpolate those as natural ground levels, then there is potentially some fairly minor variation on the western side buildings. But is that what you mean? Is that the section you're talking about?
I'm talking about the eastern side principally. Again, I'm talking about the side that's got the concern around impacting us, amenity impact.
Yes.
And those height
Yes.
differences. Because it will then ultimately go to, once we ascertain what that is, what is the extent of the impact from a planning perspective?
I'll ask Sonia if she wants to intervene, but my understanding is that basically on the eastern side, if we took the existing levels, it would still be compliant with our scheme provisions. we're doing that on the southeastern side.
Yeah.
Or on the northern eastern side, do you know what height that would be? 7.8. Okay, so the rear on the eastern side, you'd be looking at about 7.8 metres if we took it from the existing ground level. But that's not how we would work out the heights from natural ground level based on the information that's been provided to the town.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, through the chair. Really commend the town on pulling together a quality RAR for the DAP. It's a very small council, Cottesloe, low resource base, so great job. But was there any thought around the NGL and whether you could get support from the state? Because obviously with changes to the schemes coming through, these improvement schemes, there's going to be a lot more of these sort of applications. Would it not be something that you would ask the DAP to fund centrally, given that we don't have a resource base and other councils like us wouldn't have a resource base?
It's a good question. I think, thank you. Well, through the chair, I mean, so the regulations are where we get the definition of natural ground level, as I explained. So that would be applicable to all metro areas. I think at the moment, with Cottesloe's local planning scheme, which is a little bit unique in the fact that it has no discretion allowable for new developments in terms of building heights. And that is why every time we get a proposal like this, it becomes very difficult because we end up having this argument about potentially, well, what actually is natural ground level across the whole site? But I think, obviously we haven't seen the new improvement schemes that are proposed, but we do know it's going to include this area. It's probable that we'll probably be going as per the R codes rather than having those sort of fixed height provisions. And therefore the town would have discretion to allow heights for new buildings. Thank you.
Are you totally confident in the calculation that's been done for natural ground level?
Well, as is explained in the RAR report, the reason we've itemised the fact that there's about 5 different changes is because we've tried to explain that, no, we're not 100% confident, but we've gone through as much a process as we feel is reasonable to get to a point where, with the surveyor saying, look, you know, we've looked at all these other options you've asked us to look at, we've considered the different roads, and then providing rationale as to why they believe that still extends to natural ground level. We got to a point where we basically, because we don't have our own surveyor to check it, to accept that as being reasonable in this regard.
Further questions? No? All right, thank you very much, the officers. We'll move on to the RAR, which has a recommendation for approval with a number of conditions and some advice notes. I'm going to seek a mover and a seconder for the published recommendation. Is there a mover for that? I'll move. Thank you. Peter Lee. Is there a seconder for that? I'm happy to second that. All right.
Right, so this very interesting discussion about levels, etc. here. In looking at this proposal, I see an excellent proposal. I see a good use of the site. I think it's actually quite polite to its neighbours. It is actually, it appears that it's leaving the trees alone in the street, and there's a large landscape area at the rear. So it's a quality proposal that been through the process and is recommended for approval. So I support it.
Yes, as seconder, I too support the proposal. It's a good development, largely satisfies the planning framework, accepting that there are quite a few areas for which discretion is being sought. These are mostly minor in my view, and I don't believe they unduly impact the amenity of the neighbours or the wider locality. This is particularly the case when comparing this proposed development against the existing buildings on site. I note the concerns expressed by and for the neighbour to the east, particularly the calculation of the NGL. While there appear to be several ways of determining the natural ground level, the town through the RAR has presented us with a certified NGL that it believes is appropriate, resulting in a compliant building height-wise and accords with the requirements of clause 5.7. Based on the evidence presented, I am prepared to support that position. I note that the applicant has advised that the proposed screening on the terrace of the apartment 8 will be removed in response to the neighbours' concerns. With regard to the street setback, I'm satisfied that the reduced setback is appropriate and sufficiently consistent with the streetscape in the locality. I've been on site and it's quite a variety of setbacks down that street. And this is particularly the case with the additional 1.2 metres setback to the east. I don't think would make much difference or change the impact of that building on the neighbour, particularly with the condition requiring screening, landscaping to soften the impact of the wall. The proposed development provides apartments with reasonable spaces and functional outdoor areas. The access and parking are acceptable in my view. This is a quality development which I support. I'm going to ask for, is there a speaker against the development proposal? Further speakers? Member Lafanti.
This has been a very difficult one for me to consider. I do think that the design as it faces the street is a positive development in relation to its elevation and its perspective. I have, as expressed in today's meeting, got some concerns about the methodology used to identify the natural ground levels. I commend the officers of the town for a significant RAR and also a complex RAR, particularly in the face of the concerns that I have raised that the site appears to drop away towards Marine Parade, and the development appears to sit reasonably high on the site. I do accept the comments by the town officers that the methodology that has been used is somewhat complex in terms of calculating how they identify natural ground level, and the methodology, that the information that's contained within the R codes. I also agree from the neighbouring property that is a very confusing manner in which to identify natural ground level. I note that plans, particularly on the northern elevation of the apartments, show apartment 4 and apartment 8 nearest to the adjoining neighbouring property, and the elevations of those show both the proposed or extrapolated ground interpolated ground levels, and show in these particular elevations that there is a natural ground level that they say this development sits below. I have not got the expertise that can comment and dispute the surveyor's details, but I have confidence that the planning officers at the town have done a very extensive discussion on it. I note there is particular reference to the report and the frequency at which the officers return to this very issue that I have raised in order to identify how it should be dealt with in this proposal. I am on balance, I have no reason to believe that the officers are not thorough and accurate and clear in their material. And on that basis, I have not got grounds to argue against the officers' commentary in this particular matter. I do think that the proposal, as shown on its perspective, is a well-designed proposal. My biggest concern was the impact that it has on the neighbouring property at number 10 Salvado Road. And those concerns I still have some element of concerns, but I don't have sufficient data to doubt and to question the thorough assessment undertaken by the officers. The rear, as has been explained by the city, is an increase, but that the height in relation to ground level is an issue of fill rather than height of building. I have no concerns with landscaping at the rear. I note those concerns by the neighbouring property, but I don't raise any particular concerns regarding landscaping and or trees in terms of by the location or scale. I'm actually quite supportive of the introduction of landscaping generally in development. I note the concerns from the neighbouring property regarding the vistas, and I note that the information contained in this report also requires that development on this site keeps an open vista to across unit 4, I think it is, or apartment 4 to the street. From my perspective, I will support the proposal, and I would put significantly my commentary down to the thorough explanation, both in the RA and by the town officers, about this complex issue of natural ground level.
Thank you. Further speakers? Move it.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with the Deputy Presiding Member's comments 100%. I also do support the development. I think it's going to be a very nice development, very aesthetic, well received in the community. I do also have concerns, some concern about the NGL interpolated, but to hold up such a quality development, I think would be negligent at this time. And I also just would like to thank you for responding to all the questions that I raised with a very short timeline leading up to this meeting. So thank you for that.
It's the officers that did that. So
yeah, of course, but you're the figurehead.
Okay. Councillor Heath, did you want to make any comments?
Just to, yes, concur with the Deputy Presiding Member's statements. Really, I feel the same. I'm no expert at any more expert than the surveyor's reports that we read, and also the the good report of the officers, which really went into it in detail. So that's what I'm relying on to give my support for this development. And I feel for the neighbours in this case, but I think on balance, it's a really good development, and it will fit in with the streetscape. And yeah, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. I'll go back to Member Lee to close debate.
No, I won't take up any more time.
Okay, thank you. I'll now put the recommendation for approval. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Just to finish off this part of the meeting, there's no Form 2, there's no Section 31 reconsiderations, and in Part D of the meeting, SAT applications for DAPs are listed on the DAP website. And I'll close the meeting at 11:41 and thank everyone for their attendance. Thank you to those people online, the councillors online and here, and to the staff here for their support.